Trust in politics is broken. So can we get UK politics working again?
That was the last time we were happy. 2012.
I'm Beth Rigby, Sky's political editor. Join me every week with Labour's Jess Phillips and Conservative peer Ruth Davidson for some electoral dysfunction.
This idea of nuance has completely left politics.
Yeah. Together, we'll focus on the policies that could deliver political satisfaction. Follow Electoral Dysfunction wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Niall Paterson. This is the Sky News Daily, where today we want to tell not one but two stories about migration. We will end up here in the United Kingdom, where the threat of deportation to Rwanda is weighing heavily on asylum seekers from Africa. Our communities correspondent Becky Johnson spoke to one currently being held in a detention centre near Gatwick Airport.
And what's it like in there?
It's not good here. It's really disturbing. It's like a prison. We just locked in a cell.
But we begin in Senegal. Thousands of people are taking what's become known as the busiest and deadliest migrant route in the world, an arduous journey by sea ending hundreds of miles away in the Spanish Canary Islands. Such is their desperation that despite the thousands of lives already lost to the seas on that supposed path to a better life, people continue to set sail. Yousra Elbagir is Sky's Africa correspondent. She recently returned from the fishing village of Mbour on Senegal's west coast. Yousra, good to see you. Tell me about it.
Mbour is an old fishing town in Senegal. It's around 3 hours from Dakar, but it's an established old fishing town where people have been relying on the sea for generations. And when we'd arrived, it had only been 4 days since news had come back that a boat that left the Mbour beach had capsized off the coast of Canary Island, El Hierro. And the boat, there's a really haunting image of it. It's half submerged, and they found none of the bodies of the people that died there. They've only found 9 survivors. And that is such a regular occurrence that when we got to the funeral, there was a lot of grief, but it was very, very restrained. There was no shock. There were no wails of loss, of agony. It felt very regular that this was to be expected.
Yes, sir. It is impossible to imagine. So why don't you tell us about some of the people you spoke to who had this sense of acceptance? You went to the funeral of someone called Mohammed.
Yeah. The father of Mohammed, who died, had 3 sons who'd made that trip and actually succeeded, had arrived in Spain. And he wasn't that shocked that his youngest son would follow them to the Canary Islands. We were there at a very haunting moment when his fiancée, the woman Mohammed was meant to marry, walked in. She's very poised. She greeted all of us with a little curtsy, and then just collapsed at the feet of her father-in-law, who was meant to be her father-in-law, and started sobbing. It was really haunting to see people who know the sea very well. They know its unpredictability, they know its risks, they see the waves every day kind of crashing against their beach, and still it's pulling them away. Still they would rather traverse that dangerous territory than stay put in Senegal.
My knowledge of African geography is minimal, but from what little I do know, the Canary Isles are not off the coast of Senegal.
Not at all. It's a long, long journey. They have to go far west to avoid other fishing boats, to avoid the Coast Guard, and then go back around to make it to the Canary Islands. The boat that capsized before we got to Mbour had been at sea for 9 days before news came back that it had capsized. So when you just try and imagine that uncertainty for that long, it really is an indicator of how dangerous and how unpredictable it is. But the young boy that we spoke to, the teenager, I mean, he told us he was 16, but we think he's much younger. He could be around 13, 14, just by the looks of him. He was at sea for 35 days before they were found by, ironically, a Spanish boat, a Spanish fishing boat. The torture of the days passing, of food running out, of fuel running out, and they're nowhere near their destination. They don't see any land, and they have no sense of what's to come. So that just, again, it's just a horrifying picture, and it really underpins the desperation to make it to Europe.
On that journey, this young man, or boy as you and your team suspect, on that journey that they took, did they lose any lives on the way?
They lost many lives before they were found. The way he described it was that when food supplies started running out, people started to go crazy. They started drinking seawater because their water supply also had run out. And you just see people jumping off, that just committing suicide, jumping into the sea, completely unraveled by the uncertainty. This is a young teenage boy seeing this happen to people. He's grown up on the coast, and he told us, I now work at my uncle's farm. I hate the sea. And we watched him have a little swim before we interviewed him. And when we actually spoke about what he went through, he was looking out, and there was a real timidness that exposed that fraught relationship that he now has with something that he has known his whole life.
I mean, I've seen figures suggesting more than 6,600 people, in fact, died on this Atlantic route to the Canaries. So, I mean, it begs the question, why are they doing this? Why are people from this fishing community on the coast of West Africa, why are they taking to boats and fleeing their country?
Well, Senegal is a former French colony. It's had a relationship with Europe for centuries. And that relationship has been built on exports, on initially slaves and gold, and that turned into oil and gas. But fisheries have been there at the core of their relationship with Europe. And the fishing agreement that exists now has existed in some form or the other since the 1970s. And that agreement, that EU Sustainable Fisheries Partnership that Senegal has, is at the heart of discontent in Senegal right now. There is a complete feeling of being exploited. The areas they're fishing in are so explicitly exploited that these are areas that they know have no fish. And then you speak to the fishermen who say they can go out for 5 to 6 days and not find any fish. They can barely make enough to eat themselves, let alone to sell in the market. Now, the ecosystem that we saw developing kind of in the absence of business is one that includes smugglers who are fishermen. So it's not just young men who want to leave, it's also young men who are helping them leave, who are taking money from them to set them off. And we did speak to a smuggler who'd been fishing since 1998. And at the very start of our conversation, he was also lamenting the lack of fish and the fact that this is his only way to really make a living. But he also, when challenged, said they know the risks. You know, there's no one who sends their child or who goes across the Atlantic that doesn't know the risks here. But you can't dissuade them. This is the only thing we see is to go to Europe.
For some of those who are successful, it must be worth it, that there must be opportunities that exist on the other end of this difficult journey that facilitate money being sent home, support being given to family members. I mean, this is all purely economic, isn't it?
It is purely economic, and it is worth it. And they are still in contact with people who've left, who've made it, the success stories. I mean, when you look at Mohammed and his older brothers, I mean, he was probably hearing all about Spain, even though their father told us that they haven't got documentation or permanent status. But it is that promised land. It is that sense of, if I do make it, life will be so much better, and whatever risk I have to take is worth it. And I think it's always so haunting when people will face death so boldly than stay where they are at home.
Yousra, in just a moment, we're going to look at the migrant situation from this end, looking at the United Kingdom's Rwanda repatriation plans for people who, in inverted commas, arrive here illegally. I'm just wondering if anyone that you spoke to in Senegal was, one, aware of the Rwanda repatriation scheme, and 2, would be capable of being deterred about trying to get to the United Kingdom by the Rwanda repatriation scheme?
I'll be honest, Neil, it feels like that's quite a distant reality for people who have these 2 options right on their doorstep. But at the moment, we're seeing a shift from people who can afford other options away from both Libya and the Atlantic route, where they're trying to figure out ways via Nicaragua, plane rides to South America, to cross Central America into the US. I don't think anything can deter them, is my honest answer. And I think that's where these policies seem to be quite empty, because they're not looking at the root causes and they're not integrating information that's coming from the people who are leaving and arriving in the UK on these small boats. I mean, when you see some of these boats on the Senegalese coast, they are rickety, they are old, they are wooden, and yet they're still willing to get on these boats and to be at sea for days in them. So it really did make the Rwanda policy seem very hollow, if I'm honest with you.
Yousra Elbagir, thanks very much for joining us. In a moment, we'll continue to talk about the Rwanda plan and any deterrent effect it might have just a little closer to home. Welcome back. With the government promising that flights to Rwanda will be departing within weeks, Sky News has been speaking to some of those earmarked for deportation, including one currently in a detention centre close to Gatwick Airport. What we've discovered is that many are now actively considering failing to report for their regular Home Office appointments, of disappearing, essentially, before they could be forced to get on a plane. Our communities correspondent, Becky Johnson, has been doing the legwork on this story, and she joins us now. We've been hearing about it for donkey's years. It does seem like the scheme is almost up and running. Flights have yet to take off, obviously. But let's talk numbers, because recently we did hear from the Home Office on the number of people that have been targeted as potentially being part of the Rwanda repatriation scheme, and those that might have slipped through the cracks.
Well, this was actually a document that we found. The Home Office kind of didn't make any formal announcement, but civil servants had drawn up a document which is publicly available, which showed that around 5,700 individuals have been earmarked for Rwanda. But within that document, it emerged that only just over 2,000 of those, 2,143, the Home Office knows where they are. Now, that's because they are individuals who have it as a condition of their immigration bail, if you like, that they have to report to Home Office centres, which are dotted around the country. And for most people, that's kind of fortnightly appointments that they have to attend just to sign in. So the Home Office knows where they are. So around 3,500 of those people earmarked for Rwanda are missing, essentially. The government kind of doesn't really know where they are. Now, they've said that they're determined to locate them all. But what we've discovered now is that some of those individuals turning up for appointments at these Home Office centres are among those who've been detained, because some of the detentions for Rwanda are taking place at those routine appointments. And therefore, we've been speaking to people who go to their appointments as they should, who are now saying, maybe I'm going to stop, because they've seen people they know go do what is essentially the right thing as per the conditions of their asylum application here in the UK. And they've seen those people being detained and put in detention centres, now awaiting flights for Rwanda.
And just for reasons of clarity, Becky, because I think sometimes this can get a little complicated, the people who are potentially being identified for repatriation under the Rwanda scheme, that is not everyone who is part of the asylum process right now. There are some people who got into this country before the legislation was passed and therefore aren't covered by it.
Absolutely. And in the last couple of weeks, I've actually spoken to 2 people directly on the phone from detention centres. So 2 people who have been detained and told they're going to Rwanda. And both of them arrived in the summer of 2022. So almost 2 years ago. And in fact, what the Home Office is saying is that anybody who arrived in the UK after the 1st of January 2022 who hasn't yet been granted asylum, who has been given what's called a notice of intent document, could potentially be sent. So yeah, these are people, some of them who've been in the UK awaiting the outcome of their asylum application for almost 2 years, who are now being detained.
Well, let's talk about some of the people you have been speaking to, and one young man from Eritrea. Here is someone who was assured on his way into the country that the Rwanda scheme would not apply to him.
So this is a young man, 30 years old. We're calling him Kidus. That's not his real name, but of course you'll understand that these people are quite frightened to speak out. So we've agreed to protect his identity. He came over on a small boat in June of 2022. Kidus speaks good English. He's very aware. He's politically aware. He was aware of those Rwanda plans, but he says he was assured by a people smuggler that he wouldn't get sent to Rwanda. So he came over, made that dangerous journey in the small boat with many others. We have video of it. It looks, a boat crammed full of men, women, some of them without even life jackets because there were too many people on board for the number of life jackets. And he came here to the UK, and since June 2022, he's been studying English. He'd like to get a job working as a farmer. That's what he did back in Eritrea. But he's been waiting on the results of his asylum application, which he hasn't had yet. And then last week, a young man, also from Eritrea, who came in the same small boat as Kidus, that exact boat, was detained when he attended a routine appointment with the Home Office. So Kidus is suddenly very frightened. Kidus has stopped attending college. He's got numbers of lawyers and charities, which he says he has on him at all times because he doesn't know where or when he might be detained. And he's always done what he felt was the right thing, which was attend these fortnightly Home Office appointments to sign in so the Home Office knows where he is. And he's now thinking, as a result of what happened to his friend, he might stop. He thinks that if he goes, he's going to get detained. So he would then join the number of missing migrants that the Home Office has said it's trying to locate.
Why does Kidus not want to go to Rwanda? What is it that he fears or dislikes about that country?
He says it's not safe. He came from Eritrea. He says that he escaped East Africa because he didn't feel safe. He came a long journey across Europe to get to the UK because he felt that the UK would offer him safety. He speaks good English, so the UK seemed to him like the obvious choice. And interestingly now, he's saying he wishes he hadn't chosen to come to the UK. If he knew then, when he stepped into that boat, that he would be here in the UK with a letter of intent about Rwanda, with somebody that he made that journey with now in a detention centre headed for Rwanda, he says he wouldn't have come to the UK. He'd have chosen a different European country.
Becky, you spoke to Kidus's friend who was in detention. Tell me why potentially, this has sharpened Kidus's mind about attending those fortnightly Home Office meetings.
Well, this man we're calling Nahom, that's not his real name again. While Kidus is living in Birmingham, Nahom was living up near Liverpool in Home Office accommodation, and he had to report to the Home Office Centre in Liverpool fortnightly, which he was doing as he should. And then last week turned up to a routine appointment. He had no reason to suspect it would be different to any of the other times that he had been there, and he was detained. And he actually spoke to me on the phone from the detention centre where he's been taken.
First, let me introduce my...
And just say that we're here as well.
Hello?
Hello?
Okay, journalists
and he told me what it's like and how he's feeling.
Hi, hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm not good right now, but I'm trying to be good,
What have they told you there?
They told me that they're gonna remove me from here to Rwanda. They didn't tell me when.
Have you met with your solicitor? Have you been able to meet with your lawyer?
Yeah, I just met my solicitor and we talked about this situation.
Your friend was telling me you just went to a routine appointment with the Home Office, did you? And they detained you?
Yeah, I just like a normal day, like I just went for signing and I didn't have any idea, but they just hold me like a criminal. They put me in a van. I'm literally shocked.
Yeah.
Difficult situation for me here. It's been like 9 days since they locked me here, but I didn't do anything. I just asked a safety. I just claim asylum to be safe. I didn't do any criminal thing in my life. Those 2 years I have been waiting patiently for their decision to give me a refugee status, but now they're saying after 2 years of waiting, they're saying you will go back to Rwanda.
I asked him if he had people to speak to in the detention centre about how he's feeling, and he said he has been given some assistance with sleeping medication and things. But this is a young man, 26, who'd been in the UK. He said he'd just been patiently waiting for almost 2 years after submitting his asylum application to suddenly, and he believes really quite randomly, be detained.
The government has constantly said part of this scheme is to serve as a deterrent, to show people that if you come here, this is going to happen to you. To show people that if you come here, this is going to happen to you. I mean, the government has a point, doesn't it, about the deterrent effect of this plan. If you have people telling you that they would not have come here if they knew that they were at risk of deportation.
I think there are two different issues. There is the issue of whether more people will come. And if you look at the numbers, the record numbers crossing in small boats since the start of this year, the Rwanda policy as yet, and of course it only recently became law, doesn't appear to be reducing the numbers of people coming across to the UK in small boats. But I have to say that the asylum seekers who are already here, who came here quite some time ago, many that I'm now speaking to feel regretful that they chose the UK.
Becky Johnson, thanks very much indeed. That people who've come to the UK to claim asylum are regretting that decision because of the threat of deportation to Rwanda, well, that will be seen by those in government as proof the scheme could work. But thinking twice about that decision, once here in Britain, is not the same as being dissuaded from trying in the first place. After all, the very real threat of drowning hasn't deterred many from crossing the Channel. Neither has it deterred those leaving Senegal in their thousands. If death is not a deterrent, what possibly could be? That's your lot for this edition of The Daily. We'll see you soon.